and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Madhura Lohokare, and I work at the Center for Writing Studies at OP Jindal Global University, and I'm delighted to welcome you all on behalf of the CWS today for the first of a series of online conversations that we are going to be hosting on emergent forms of writing. So, in today's conversation, which we have titled as Belonging to Many Worlds, on multilingual writing, we have with us Kamal and Choubey and Noopur Desai, who will be talking to us about the process and the politics of writing in more than one language and the political implications of multilingual writing. Before I go on to introduce our guests for today, I also want to take a quick couple of minutes to introduce to you the rationale behind this series. At the Center for Writing Studies, we've been around since 2018. We have been deeply invested in broadening our understanding of the process of writing, which of course is simultaneously personal and political, and whose forms mutate, evolve within, again, multiple institutional spaces in order to shape new knowledges. So towards this end, we really are hoping to initiate these conversations around new ways of writing in the contemporary moment, which seem to be really boldly scripting their own grammars, their own forms, which also are then laying new grounds for newer understandings of voice and really of the process of knowledge production itself. So we call this series, the broad series, we call this Notes on a New Grammar, and hope to engage through the series with the emergent grammars, really, and new knowledges in the form of whether it's memes, it's zines, it's writing on social media, or multilingual writing, like we would be talking about today. So let me, with this brief background, let me turn to our guests for today, Noopur Desai and Kamal and Choubey. I extend a very warm welcome to both of you. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of this conversation. I'll quickly introduce our two speakers today. Kamal and Choubey is an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science in Dyal Singh College of Delhi University. He has completed his PhD from the Department of Political Science, Delhi University, which was his research was a study of the tribal forest land rights in India, and which was also later published in the form of a book titled Jungle Ki Hakdari, Rajniti or Sangharsh, which was published by Vani Prakashan in 2015. Kamal also did a postdoctorate from Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in Delhi, and the topic of his research for his postdoc was law as a site of contestation between state and the margin, comparative study of the two progressive laws, PISA and FRA, from 2012 to 2014. Besides this, Kamal is also a member of the editorial team of reputed peer-reviewed journal Pratiman, which is published by CSDS. Many of you might be familiar with it. And he has also published articles in journals like EPW, Studies in Indian Politics, Social Change, and so on. Kamal also hosts a YouTube channel in Hindi, which is called Parakh, which covers a wide range of themes, including detailed reviews of academic books, political theory, and issues of contemporary political and social relevance. So welcome, Kamal. Thank you for joining us. Our second guest for today is Noopur Desai. Noopur is an art writer and researcher who writes in Marathi and English. Currently, Noopur is a researcher at the Art Asia Archive in India, based in New Delhi. With an interest in periodicals as sites of construction, Noopur has been researching on art writings in Marathi periodicals, histories of little magazine movement, and its relation to the development of art historical discourse in the regional context. She's also the co-founder and co-editor of an online bilingual journal, Hakara, which is published in Marathi and English, which brings together various forms of creative expressions through practice-based approach, translations, and new forms of writing. Noopur is currently pursuing her doctoral studies at the School of Media and Cultural Studies at TIS, Mumbai. And her PhD research focuses on Bombay/Mumbai as a case study investigating various kinds of public art practices and artistic interventions in public spaces in the forms of festivals, museum practice, and community-based art projects. Noopur is also the recipient of Fika Ila Dalmia Research Grant of 2015 for her project Formulating Dialogical Art, an archival project of public art interventions, where she focused, I'm sorry, where she focused on the genealogy and development of public art practices in major cities in India. She's also been engaging with the idea of socially engaged art practice through several initiatives, one of them being the Council for Arts and Social Practice, CASP, if some of you might be aware of it, of CASP. So again, let me extend a very, very warm welcome to both Noopur and Kamal. Just before we started, we all were chatting, and both Kamal and Noopur said that, we hadn't really thought in specific terms of, writing in two languages before you invited us for this. And I think that as academics, as researchers, we all get several forums where we have the opportunity, where we are expected to explicitly engage with our specific research. But it's interesting that, considering the fact that as academics, researchers whose knowledge production rests on our ability to write, there is precious little space or incentive that is made available for us to engage with our writing process. So I really hope that this conversation gives all of us the room to reflect upon our act of writing and its implications, right? I'll just quickly tell you all the format of this conversation. It really is, I hope it is a conversation. I will be talking to Noopur and Kamal. We will have broadly about 50 minutes to 55 minutes of certain broad themes that I will seek both your responses on, have some questions pertaining to your process, writing, and then we will throw the floor open to questions and comments from our audiences as well. Yeah. Okay. So once again, thank you all for joining us, and here we go. To begin with, really, both Noopur and Kamal, I mean, do you identify as multilingual writers? What do you call yourselves? I mean, we have invited you, but how do you identify yourselves as? And anyone, I mean, feel free to jump in.
Can I go first?
Sure, sure.
Yeah. So thank you, Madhura, for inviting me here today as part of this conversation, and thank you all for joining in on a Monday evening. So to respond to your question, I think, I mean, for as much as one could be in the context of India or in South Asia, I am a multilingual person. And also it comes from, like, I studied in a Marathi medium school. I then went on and studied in English medium in college. But like, for example, at home, there would be conversations in Kannada because some of my families come from northern part of Karnataka, and my parents would also sometimes switch to Kannada when they didn't want me to kind of follow their conversation. So which made me all the more curious to understand what they are kind of actually talking, and I also kind of started catching some phrases, some expressions, some words from Kannada. I studied in Baroda later on, where I did my master's. So for basic communication, I of course needed to converse in Gujarati. There are a lot of friends from different parts of India, and some of them would also kind of speak to their own regional languages when they would come together. For example, friends from Bengal or Kerala. So you kind of also start getting a kind of a sense of different languages. Um, and I started kind of following those. But as a reader, I was reading in three different languages: Marathi, English, and Hindi, which I was most comfortable with. So in terms of literature, in terms of academic writings, and so on and so forth. So as a person, I would say that I am a multilingual person, as most of us are. But when it comes to writing, I would identify myself as a bilingual writer. because I choose to write in two languages, that is Marathi and English. And when I say bilingualism, I'm kind of trying to move away from a very rigid and restrictive definition of bilingualism, and maybe it will also come through our conversation today. Uh, but most like more looking at a more kind of a flexible definition of bilingualism, because bilingualism is also kind of considers that uh, one person has to have a complete hold on two different languages. But when you acquire languages, sometimes it's simultaneous acquisition, sometimes it's symmetric, sometimes asymmetric. In terms of linguistic
Right.
systems or words that you kind of so so not kind of or in case of India also we understand bilingualism in terms of English and another Indian language. So I don't want to get caught up in that, but kind of or not kind of posing one language against another and looking at it as a binary, but more kind of a flexible use of a language. And in that context, I would kind of call myself a bilingual writer. Uh, yeah,
Bilingual writer and a multilingual person,
yeah, yeah.
which probably is true for several of us. Yeah, yeah. Kamal, Kamal, your on mic is mute.
Yeah. Okay. So I will describe myself as obviously a multilingual person because I can understand Bhojpuri. I can speak Bhojpuri, which is my mother tongue. I can understand and write in Hindi, and then I can understand and write in English, and then I can understand many other languages like I can understand Punjabi, uh,
Mhm.
Bangla, and some other languages. But as far as academic writings are concerned, I think I will describe myself as a person or as a student or as a teacher who is primarily working in Hindi or who has been primarily working in Hindi. But after some times, after completion of his PhD, in fact, he realized that actually he must also write in English. So,
Mm.
and here I will talk about only two languages because I do my writings only in two languages, one in Hindi and another one is English. So I will describe myself that actually I'm coming from the side of Hindi. I have done
Mm.
most of my works in Hindi. I have done most of my writings in Hindi, but in last few years, I will say last 6 to 7 to 8 years, I'm also trying to write in English to publish my works in English. And I think I feel that I'm obviously more comfortable in Hindi, but I cannot claim that I know very good Hindi or I can write very good Hindi. So my point here is that knowing language is also a process. We can know it gradually. So I will say that if I will take a scale of 100, I will say that okay, I'm comfortable with Hindi at the point of 70, and as far as English is concerned, I'm near a point of 50. So I'm learning both the languages, but I'm more comfortable with Hindi, and I think I'll describe myself as a person who is in the side of Hindi and who is trying to go beyond this, comfort zone and trying to work in
Right,
English.
right, right. So, I mean, I think it is, again, I actually didn't know anything about your journey, your trajectories, but it's clearly, again, we all, and I think this is common to all of us, that all of us are, especially in the Indian context, multilingual persons who are sort of traveling between at least two, if not more, languages. And again, as you said, that both of you though write in two languages, but you, in that sense, if I were to, it takes me back to the title really, to think of belonging to really many worlds. I mean, we have what, Bhojpuri, Marathi, Kannada, English, Hindi, Punjabi, Bengali, right now between the two of you. Um, I mean, and I'm sure like in this room right now, we probably will have 15 languages, probably more, right? Um, but I find it again, and we'll come to this a little later in our conversation, that considering the fact that And this is something that we all know in the Indian context. We all are multilingual, essentially. Um, but again, when it comes to actually writing, there is a tiny, teeny, minuscule percentage of us who actually can write in more than one language. I mean, multilingual probably is too much of a stretch, but more than one language also. And I mean, I would like us to come back to this point a little later. But now that you both detailed for us, where you're coming from, it would also be great if I think if you can share with us your trajectory of really starting to write in two languages. I mean, both of you said that you came from Hindi and Marathi respectively. Your starting point was that, and then you have moved to English, right? So how was this? How would you characterize this trajectory? When was it that you started it? I mean, Kamal, you did say that you started a few years after a few years after your PhD, when you realized that you have to start writing in English. But again, if you could give us access to how did it begin? What were the feelings when really you realized कि English में ही लिखना पड़ेगा? Yeah,
Should I
that is
start?
something.
Okay. So, okay.
Sure.
So basically, I did my graduation from Allahabad University, Young Christian College. And from there onwards, there was this feeling that we should work in Hindi. So a sort of Hindi nationalism, we can also say this. When I came to Delhi University for my master's, then again, I and many other students faced different kind of problems due to a Hindi medium. Only few teachers were ready to take us seriously. But again, this feeling was there that okay, we will read or we should read English readings, and but we should write in Hindi only. So and there was, as I told you, there was this comfort level that okay, I can do or I can write better in Hindi, so I should work in this language only. And I remember that when I was about to register for my PhD, so I talked to Professor Ujwal Singh for being my supervisor, and I did my MPhil with Nivedita Mena. So she also encouraged me in masters that no, you should write in Hindi. So Professor Singh actually told me that no, you should write your PhD in English because no one will take your work seriously if you write it in Hindi. But I think there was this feeling that no, I should work in Hindi. I don't know how should I describe it. Maybe one thing is that I was more comfortable with Hindi, and the another thing was that okay, we should try to do some academic work in Hindi too. So both the feelings were there, and Professor Menon also told Ujwal Singh that no, I think you should give permission to Kamal to write in Hindi only. So I completed my work. I was able to give interviews in English. I was able to take some classes in English. So there was, I mean, I will not say that I was not able to express myself in English, but I think I never thought about writing systematic things in English till 2012. So I went for an interview in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Mahesh Rajan was there, Achin Vinayak was there. So they asked lots of questions, and then they also commented on this point that actually you have written most of the things in Hindi only. So then Achin Vinayak and Mahesh Rajan both, because they knew me, they told that okay, now you should write in English too. And then Mahesh Rajan told Achin that I think Kamal will start writing in English too. So this pressure, I will can use this term pressure, or I can use this kind of thing that people are suggesting that okay, you should write in English too. Hindi में तो बहुत लिखते ही हो, so you should write in English, or there are many other things. Then due to this pressure, I actually started, but I also felt that actually in academic world, and I'm talking about teachers, professors, and researchers, that actually, if you are not writing in English, you will find that you are writing for some different kind of readers. So it is necessary for, at least in India or maybe in other parts of the world too, that you should write in English if you want to get some kind of recognition in your peer group. So people, if people will introduce you and you are just writing in Hindi, they will say that बहुत मेहनत करते हैं, बहुत काम करते हैं, but they will not recognize your work, your research work. And it's not their fault, because they will recognize if they will actually know that what kind of writings you are doing or what kind of research you are doing. And for this, I thought that it is necessary for me to write in English. So I start my journey of writing in English. And when I submitted my occasional paper in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, the person who had this responsibility to edit that writing, she was really angry because there were lots of mistakes. Some and it was a painful journey, I will also say. So I think expressing yourself in English, taking class, all these things are also very difficult, but a systematic writing in English was a very difficult thing for me. So I picked from there, and then I tried to write lots of things, and I submitted my report, final work in Nehru Memorial in English. Then I wrote some papers. Right now I'm working on draft of my book, and I'm doing a major research project, and then again I'm writing in English. So I think, as I mentioned, that I started from Hindi, and I still say that I'm a Hindi wala, and I mean in positive sense, not in a sense of Hindi nationalism or any other thing, but I'm moving from, and I'm trying to move from that comfort zone. And I think it is good for every person to move from his or her comfort zone. So, in this sense, I will say that this is my journey, which is still going on. So my journey is slightly different from most of the persons who are in academics, because you will find that people are generally, I mean, for example, Shivani. So she has been writing in English, and then she's trying to write something in Hindi. But my case is opposite. So this is my journey, and I think I'm trying to work both in both the languages. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Noopur?
So as Kamal said, my journey is exactly the opposite. So though I studied in Marathi medium in school, but my college education was mainly in English, and I went to Baroda. And in MS University, you have to do a lot of research and you have dissertation, and which is primarily the language is of instruction is English. So my academic research writing kind of began, and I started writing in English. So for few years after my masters, I continued writing in English on art. When I say art, I'm mainly talking about art writing. Uh, there are also a couple of instances when, like for example, a very well-known artist, Sudhir Patwardhan, who's based in Bombay, he himself writes in English and in Marathi. So he kind of urged me to write, he said that you should start writing in Marathi because I mean, you can straddle both the worlds, so it's possible for you. And that kind of stayed with me, but I didn't have the courage to kind of immediately start writing in Marathi. It also because the way I was trained, the kind of books that I had access to, the kind of material that I was using for writing, research, reading, it was mainly in English. So art history as a discipline kind of is mainly written in English, and it overshadows. I mean, I'm talking about mainstream art historical discourse, and it kind of overshadows what is happening in other languages, other Indian languages. So that is how I was trained in. And then what I was I mean, the impetus to write in Marathi was also from outside, and what was happening in the field of contemporary art and art historical research. And a few years back, Asia Art Archive, where I work now, they launched a art writing project where they started compiling art writings from different Indian languages. And they put together a bibliography of art writing. And it's kind of a consolidated database of published writings for last 100 years or more than 100 years maybe. And that kind of also uh, uh, consolidated in another project, publications project, where they were looking at periodicals as a site of art writing. That was the project that I started working on. And I started looking at Marathi periodicals and art writing that happened in Marathi periodicals. And the time period that I was looking at was 1950s, 60s, and 70s for that particular project. And I realized that there was immense material available and a lot of writing that has already happened. And I was also kind of wondering why, why was I not introduced to this writing when I was studying art history? Or where was this material as part of my art history syllabus or class? And that is how I think I also kind of thinking about writing in Marathi. And then a couple of other things like writing projects happened. I started writing for a Marathi monthly, Purogami Janagarjana, and I would write a column on contemporary art in Marathi. That time I was also doing research on public art. So what I would do is, because I knew that I was going to finally write my report and my paper in English. So while I was doing my field work, I would write field notes in Marathi, and which they would publish on a monthly basis. And then I also wrote a column for Lok Satta, which was also in Marathi. And Lok Satta, Abhijit Tamane from Lok Satta invited me to write. And I took that opportunity because I also realized that I was kind of interested in writing in Marathi. And it was on a post-independence women artist from India. So that is also something that hasn't been written in Marathi. So I thought that would be a kind of an interesting space to engage with. And then there was a time when we began working on Hakara, which is a bilingual online journal, and Ashutosh is here, I think, today, who is also a playwright, scholar, and a bilingual writer who writes in Marathi and English. And when we were thinking about Hakara, we were also looking at various examples of existing bilingual, trilingual journals. Like for example, there is Guftagu right now. There was few years back there was Pratilipi, or even in European context there are journals like Emergent Narrative, which is published in French and English. So these are different like examples, or in case of art schools. I mean, Rupa Bheda was published from JJ School of Arts in the 60s, which is a trilingual magazine. They used to publish it in Hindi, Marathi, and English. Or Shantiniketan has a Nandan, their annual publication, which is again published in English and Bengali. So this is like the pool of resource, and what you realize that these bilingual journals also created a very like interactive space, a dialogical process, and that kind of also informed our working. And when we were kind of conceiving this as an online platform, the idea was also to kind of focus on a work in progress, practice based approach, but also thinking through the overlaps between different creative fields and looking at interdisciplinarity, which cannot be overlooked today. And most importantly, how all this can be put forth, articulated, or represented in a bilingual format. And what are the ways in which one understands the modalities of emergence of various forms of writing? Can translation become a tool to
Mm.
navigate through these different forms? Or how can these different writings inform writings in another language? So these were the kind of questions that we were thinking about and uh, were wanted to address, and I think that process is still going on. So
Right.
yeah, so that's the kind of uh, journey of
Yeah.
my art
This
writing. Yes.
enormous sort of variations in the combinations and permutations. I mean, you did your schooling in Marathi, then started writing in English, and now are coming back to Marathi. Kamal, you did your research work in Hindi, and I'm assuming schooling in Hindi, and now are coming to English while continuing your work in Hindi. And a couple of things which both of you mentioned, very, I think, important sort of crucial signposts. One thing that you said, Kamal, that one felt that if you didn't write in English, your work will not be taken seriously. right? Yeah, even the teachers were not ready to take you seriously when you were doing your college education. And what you've touched upon, of course, is a huge question in really the hierarchy of knowledge production in our context, of course. And I mean, we all know the status of knowledge produced in English language and the status of knowledge produced in languages, other Indian languages other than English. There is a very, very clear difference there. But as writers who are now straddling, and this is again for both of you, as writers who are straddling English, who are writing in English and in Marathi or Hindi, how would you say you place yourself in terms of that hierarchy of knowledge production now? Because this is really such different statuses, that are allocated to Hindi or Marathi on one side and then English on the other side. The visibility that is there accorded to research that gets published in English vis-a-vis research that might get published in Marathi or Hindi. So how does that place you as knowledge producers in this hierarchy then?
Let's okay. So I told you that some questions are really difficult. So I think I'll
This is
just try
one
to
of them.
answer.
Okay.
So basically, I will say something from my experience of Pratiman, the journal published by CSDS in Hindi. So basically, when we started, when CSDS started the publication of Pratiman, and I was also a member, I'm still a member of the editorial team. So I realized, and the many other academicians also welcomed it, particularly from social sciences or political science, because there was this feeling that if serious social scientists like Aditya Nigam and Abhay Kumar Dubey, Rakesh Pandey, the editorial team is really impressive. So if they are trying to do something in Hindi for social sciences, then we will or we can expect some good research work or some good research writing in Hindi. So, and then we realized, and if you focus on the public sphere of Hindi, you'll find that actually it's a very vibrant public sphere. And on Facebook only, you'll find that people are discussing lots of issues in Hindi, and there are lots of debates, and there are lots of politics in those people who are writing in Hindi. But we realized that actually most of the people who, in the beginning, this was a situation that most of the people who are coming from Hindi background, for them, Pratiman kind of thing, which is a social science journal, was very difficult, a new kind of experiment. And generally, we also found that for those who are just there as English medium teacher or English medium students, this kind of experiment was just for the help of Hindi medium students or those who are reading Hindi. So there was a clear-cut hierarchy, hierarchy in the sense that those who were writing in English or those who were able to study in English, for them, any experiment or any writing or any research work which is written in Hindi is not that much serious thing, because they had this feeling or they have this feeling that they can find these things in English too. So what I'm trying to say here is that one thing is that obviously there is this hierarchy, and those who are writing in English and not in any Indian language, and I'm here just talking about Hindi, then they always feel that they are superior. But even though the Hindi public sphere is very vibrant, the situation of those persons who are writing social sciences in Hindi is really we can say they are not acceptable, or they have not been acceptable in that public sphere. Okay, but gradually things changed, and we can find that now, for example, today we received the fifth edition of Pratiman. I found that many people are now sharing that, okay, the new issue of Pratiman has published. But my point here is that if you are doing research work, social science research work in Hindi, you will find that actually you are in a situation where those who are doing their work in English, they will not take your work seriously. Even if they are from North India, they will say that I cannot read Hindi. I mean, this is a kind of a structure. And other persons who are actually constituting Hindi public sphere, they will say that it's very theoretical, it's very tough, and I think आपको और सरल तरीके से थोड़ा लिखना चाहिए. So you should write an article in 1500 words. Okay, so I think the situation is, if you are doing work in Hindi, you will find yourself in a obviously in a hierarchical situation. Some people are not accepting you as a normal writer because they think that what you are writing is really difficult. Okay, it's more theoretical, and some people think that actually what you are writing is uh, okay, it's serious, but I think you should write in English, then we will read. Otherwise, it's not possible for us. But after saying all these things, I'll also try to mention this point that actually situation is changing now. People are accepting these things normal. And I will say that if I think about my situation as a quote unquote bilingual writer, okay, I will say that when I write in Hindi, I always try to write things in more explanatory sense. So for example, if I'm writing a paper in English, I will talk about a particular theory. I will write one sentence, I will give reference, and then I'll move on. But in Hindi, if I'm writing in Hindi, and even if I'm writing a research paper for Pratiman, I always try to explain those things. Okay, so because in my mind, I have some different kind of readers. Okay, so I think that when we are writing in Hindi or any other, I'm talking about Hindi only here. So I think that most of the readers, if they are not coming from social science background, and if they want to know these things, uh, you just cannot expect that they will read it from other sources. So you have to mention those. If you're writing something about Foucault, you must write a footnote and explain that actually who is Foucault, what kind of main things he's trying to say, and all those things. So I think this is also an important thing that even though there is some kind of hierarchy, and if you are trying to dialogue with those, both sides, okay, you have to write or express yourself in different manners. There are some other points which I will say after some other questions. Okay.
Right, right. Noopur?
Yeah, so I think where do I place in this? So when kind of, I mean, as I was saying that I was working on this project on art writing. So I'm also going to talk from that perspective. Is there are a lot of, I mean, though we are saying a kind of bilingual as a emergent form, I would say that there is a long history of bilingual or multilingual writers. I'm
Yes.
again talking about from the art field because that's the field that I know a little bit about. And there were artists, writers, and they were not only writing in English and another Indian language, but some of them were also writing or still are writing into apart from English. Like for example, you would find Atul Dodia's writings in Marathi, who is a Gujarati, who identifies as a Gujarati, born and brought up in Bombay. He's also written, he speaks in Gujarati, but he's also written in Marathi the articles. There are also like writers who are, for example, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, who has written in Hindi, he has written extensively in English on art, modern and contemporary art, on miniature painting. But as a writer, he also writes in Gujarati, and he's very active part of the literary sphere in Gujarat. So I think, and I would like to situate myself in that kind of history of art writers, bilingual art writers, because I think it's also important that we kind of recognize this context and the context within which these kind of art writers emerged. And when I'm writing, I'm kind of also borrowing from both these worlds, English as well as Marathi. And I'm not saying it in some kind of romanticized mode, as if there is kind of synthesis of two traditions of writings or culture or
Mm.
whatever. It absolutely doesn't work that way. It is negotiated, mediated through multiple layers, hierarchical structures, as you kind of said, as also Kamal pointed out, in terms of hierarchy between English and other Indian languages. And I think we are also assuming English as one of the Indian languages here.
Right.
But also your class and caste background, your location in the field of art writing, what you choose to write, and so on. So I think I see that there is a tension between these two spheres as well, and a strong pull that is drawing them apart in different directions. And because of these two worlds are so different and distinct from each other, I think the writer is also forced to write in two different languages sometimes, as Kamal again
Mm.
pointed out,
Mm.
especially when it comes to writing in English. And it
Yes.
is a kind of what you can call forced bilingualism.
Mm.
But also, again, as I said, that when we are looking at Indian languages and when we are talking about knowledge production and hierarchical structure in relation to that, we also have to think about that each language has dominant forms and marginalized forms. Even if we are talking about Marathi
Yes.
or Hindi,
Yes.
so the language that I write is a very standard Marathi language.
Mm.
So I think these are all different things that we need to kind of ponder on when we talk about that. Although also I think I was thinking about the issue of translatability when it comes to language, and also the kind of uh, also the burden of linguistic and regional identity. These are two important things I think, which kind of permeates through every phase of your work. And because I mean there is also kind of you want to reading the repetition of your language, and what is happening there, but also you want to overcome the burden of contemporary political history, especially in case of
Yes.
Marathi, for example. And there is this history of parochialism, language dominance, and politics of exclusion. So how do you kind of deal with that is also and in terms of knowledge production, I think all these aspects become extremely important to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I hear also, apart from several other things that you touch upon, is the strange bind that, those of you who write in a language more than one find yourselves in. Like that you are never, you can, at times when you write in Hindi, you're never serious enough. Or if you write in English, then for Hindi readers, you are too difficult and you're too serious in that sense. Or then this continuous negotiating between parochial and language nationalist versus the so-called, cosmopolitan, so to say. So that's clearly, definitely not an enviable position to negotiate as somebody who writes in these two languages. But what I want to pick up on, which I think came through both your, what both of you, your trajectories actually, is really the institutionalized ways of knowledge production, which then are, pushing, as you said, Nupur, like a forced kind of bilingualism. And I mean, what I want to highlight here is that if, let's say, if we are multilingual persons, all of us, and for us to become multilingual writers, though, it's going to take a certain institutionalized support, right? Like, how do we learn in schools and colleges? How is our college education organized? How is the world of publishing organized? What kind of publishing gets, what kind of publishing is given the prestige of knowledge, right? It's only when all these, larger political economic questions of knowledge production and the institutionalized ways, if they um, uh, sort of work together to produce a multilingual writer. But here we have writers like you both, who in our today's context, there is no institutional context which will encourage the production of a multilingual writer. In fact, all our institutions are heavily, heavily stacked against really either you working in English, or then some who will never get access to English and then will work in only one language. So here is you both who are bilingual writers, who are writing in a language more than one, despite all these institutional obstacles and challenges. And Nupur, because you, what does that really then say about our social location, or who gets to be a multilingual writer, or who gets to be a bilingual writer? I think that is that something that you might want to reflect on, because I know, Nupur, you also right now just broached the topic of your caste and class capital that you bring also. So really, when there is no institutionalized sort of mechanisms which will encourage multilingual writing, here we have two multilingual bilingual writers. And what does your larger location, do you think that has something to do with how that has worked out?
Yeah, definitely. And it is also be able to have access to education, which
Mm,
is the university education, for example, which is possible because of the cultural capital that I have and the kind of location that I come from. And also the possibility of kind of exploring uh, two different worlds of writing. Uh, is also is possible because of that, and but also I think, um, as I said, that there is this long history of writers and artists writing, and even today you see there are many people who are kind of writing in two different languages. And also, when you write in two different languages, it is also a very conscious effort to kind of to reach out to a certain constituency of people or audiences. Uh, and I think bilingualism gives you that opportunity. Also, like for example, I will again talk about it from art history, the discipline of art history. And when we were kind of thinking about regional art writings, one way is to kind of looking at it as, because there is one kind of canonical art history that is there, and you accommodate these other marginalized forms of writing or languages of writing, and not look at it as a kind of a derivative of the mainstream kind of a narrative, but to kind of look at it as, I mean, so thinking about multilingualism or bilingualism as not as a kind of emergent form, or not as a kind of extension, but more kind of expanding the field. You know, be it art history, be it political science, it could be any other discipline, but more kind of how you can bring in these conversations, because you understand that it's the conversations are also happening at a different level, in these different spheres, and you also have to understand what are the different locations that you could bring in. And so one way of doing that is through research, and I think there is a recent kind of interest that is developed in regional writing, and in bilingualism and multilingualism, and looking at these writings, which also kind of, I mean, I would give you like a very example about, for example, in the discipline of visual studies and art historical writing, Gary Tattapo has done like fabulous work on Dalit imagery and Dalit aesthetics and imagery of Ambedkar. But what you see is that in regional language context, you would find different kind of voices. Talking about in Marathi or in Gujarati or in Hindi. Talking about this imagery, this formation of Ambedkarite imagery, for example, and which needs to be bring into the mainstream, of course. But also, one has to understand what are the contexts within which these different discourses are taking place or emerging. I think it's the kind of a multi-fold process in that sense. But also thinking about, I mean, you also brought up the issue about caste, and I think, or different kinds of caste, class, gender, and having access. So what happens is, in many times English is a language of freedom and liberation. It is also empowering. I mean, there is a forced bilingualism, and you have to write in English to be able to, have that position. But kind of seriously to view the dichotomy between seeing English as a signifier of modernity by the oppressed classes and seeing English as a signifier of colonialism, because it has that history. So how we are kind of going to look at these two uh, thing as their parity or disparity? Because it is also the language gives you access to capital, to information, technology, and global discourse. So I think selection of language is also deliberate sometimes, and it's deliberate and conscious choice, not because you can't write something in your uh, indigenous language, your mother tongue, or your regional language, whatever you want to call it. But you want to be heard, you want to be recognized, you want to be taken cognizance of in the larger public sphere, which is also sort of determines the choice and the idiom. And this kind of process carries a form of language, certain lexicon, styles of writing. Like you want to write in an academic way, for example, or you write in a more populist kind of a way, for example, whatever that choice would be. But I think it comes from all these different kinds of aspects. I don't know if
And I
I
think,
answered your question, but yeah.
no, no, sure. And I think what you brought up really, that sometimes it's not forced, but you choose to write in a language, in a language, if it is the language of power. And I think that this we can see very clearly in, if one has followed the critiques that have come out of the national education policy, right? And the question of language education in native language, whatever. I mean, there is a very vague category that NEP has. There is mother tongue, local language. So it's a very vague category. And then, of course, school education till preferably till class eighth in that in your native language. And then there has been a huge critique coming from Dalit and marginalized sections saying, first you deny us education and now you'll deny us English
English.
education, right? So absolutely, I think that is. I think what your response also makes me think of is that when we are thinking of writing in more than one language, I think it is very, very important to think of what is the standpoint from which you are approaching the question of writing in more than one language. Because this, for instance, where I am coming from, is clearly a broadly an English anglophone, English speaking academic discourse, which is engaging with the question of writing in more than one language. But clearly, as Nupur, you're also saying that there has been, I mean, this is, you're right, that this is not exactly an emergent form in the sense that we've had a very long history of writing which straddles two languages, which straddles two worlds. So I think that that would be an important thing to think about. Yeah, sorry, Kamal. I just took off from Nupur's response though.
No, I just want to add this point that actually the institutional setup, particularly in big cities like Delhi,
Mm,
is
mm,
like, and I think there is this feeling in the mind of common people too, that actually we must know English, or our children or students or must know English. And I generally find that we actually turn this idea into a different idea, that you should know English, but you should also forget your, Hindi or Marathi. I mean, I'm not talking about every person, but I feel that this is the dominant idea. So I know many students who actually started to write in English, and they, not all of them, but most of them, actually started to argue that they are not able to understand Hindi, because
mm,
for them, writing in Hindi and even saying that I understand very good Hindi is, it's not up to their status. So it's a situation, it's a real situation, because we can find that in academics we have turned English as a uh, source of power, which is I think unfortunate thing. If Hindi is a source of power, then again it is an unfortunate thing. But the point is that it is not very difficult thing. I mean, I can also find opposite phenomena, because we can find that now in cricket commentary, people are doing it in Hindi too. Okay, many English news channels where anchors are shouting, they are now shouting in Hindi too. Earlier they were only shouting in English. So because all these things are there, they have realized that okay, Hindi has market and we must do something in Hindi too. So I think it's a very simple thing that we must say students, and I'm just talking about here about my experience, that in my class, for example, is now I think 95% students are writing in English. Okay, but they always uh, feel good when I give them some example related to their lives, and when I explain things in Hindi, because most of them are coming from Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar, and of course I'm not including in this list students from Northeast or South Indian students. So in every year there are students from northeastern states, and in some years we can get some students from South India too. But those who, I mean, most of them who actually know Hindi, they prefer to listen in Hindi. So I think it's a very simple thing that if we have training in one language and we are able to write or express ourselves in one language, I think we must add one clause that you should also learn some other language, and you should also try to express in that language too. If you're writing in English and you're writing in Hindi too, it is not a bad thing. Okay, and now I think people have realized it. I think post 2014, many professors are now trying to publish their works in Hindi or many other languages, because they have realized that actually what we have been doing is just a small kind of thing, और हम लोग आपस में डिस्कस करते रह गए और कुछ और चीजें हो रही हैं जो हम समझ नहीं पा रहे हैं. तो आई थिंक देयर इज सम काइंड ऑफ चेंज टू. सो आई डोंट थिंक, I mean, all these issues are important, which Noopur mentioned, and I also know that many students who are coming from marginalized section, they always think that we should write in English, and we even if we are not able to express ourselves in a very fluent way in English, we should do it in English only. And I think it's a very good thing. They must do this. But there is one small thing that, okay, you should always try to do a thing which will give you more recognition. But there is no need to forget that you can express yourself in Hindi too. You can, and there is need to work for Hindi too. I mean, I'm talking about Hindi only. There could be other languages. So there is need to, give training to write in Hindi too. So I think we should, Hindi or any other language, Marathi or Kannada, we should try to add this small clause in our orientation, that obviously you should know more languages, you should know the language of power, but it is not necessary to forget your own language. It is not necessary to just write in one language. You can write in two languages, three languages, and I think it needs only a change in our orientation, our thinking process. So this is my
Yeah.
response. I'll also say that it is, I mean, I was also thinking like this only in around 2008, 2009, that okay, it is not necessary to write in English. I should always write in Hindi. But due to some reasons, I found that no, I should try to write in English too, and I'm enjoying it too. I must confess that for me, writing in Hindi is like playing 2020 in one day match, but writing in English, particularly research papers or books, is like playing test match. So you need a different kind of orientation, and it is a good thing. So I think all of us should change ourselves a little bit, and we should also make it part in our education or in our teaching. That is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Kamal, thank you for saying this. And I will have one thing to add, because what you're saying that we should have this clause of course, you should write in English, but you should also write in Hindi, let's say. And I think that though, I mean, as a thought, of course, it's a, that's something that we should advocate. But then, unless and until we make those institutional spaces available where then Hindi will carry the same kind of prestige, knowledge production in Hindi, till then, why will anyone want to write, right? I mean, that's how so many folks do want to write only in English. And I think that that's where both your and Nupur's work as editors of you have been on the editorial board of Pratiman. Nupur, you have co-founded and co-edited, you co-edit Hakara. um, that's where I think your work as editors also comes into foreground, because you are, I think, at one level also creating that institutional support, right? That if you are writing in Hindi, you are writing in academic format in Hindi. Here is a peer reviewed journal where you will get published. Or if you are writing in Marathi or English, in terms of creative expression, here is a journal where you can publish that, right? So, and Hakara is also a peer reviewed journal, right? So I just want to briefly want you both to reflect upon, what is the role that your these journals that you are editing, and in a way you're curating certain kind of knowledges to be published in Hindi and Marathi through these journals. So what is the role that they are playing in then creating also a certain audience, right? You're not simply inviting people to write, but with that, by publishing that, you're also creating a certain kind of audience, right? So could you reflect a little bit on what are these? Are you creating a distinct audience then by having these journals in Hindi and Marathi?
Uh, I think first Nupur should answer, then I'll answer.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Um, yeah, so I mean, as you were talking about institutions and institutional support, I think I was also thinking about how these alternative platforms can kind of play that role, of being forums or platforms for different kinds of conversations that can take place, and also in different languages, not just in English. And like Pratiman is more academic kind of journal. Hakara is and we call it journal of creative expression. So it invites different forms of writing and visual works from varied backgrounds. And we have open call every time, so we receive like a lot of entries. People submit their works, which we also review and then make a selection. And over the years, I think it has built a steady leadership because I mean, we have, and what we also try to do is a kind of a combination of more creative forms of writing as well as more serious and academic uh, forms of writing. I'm assuming that academic is not creative, but yeah, so like different forms of writing which kind of will speak to each other through this. And I think because of that, we kind of have received a great response. And we receive entries from different parts of India, even outside sometimes, which is kind of great. And a lot of submissions come from young writers, uh, writing in both the languages, especially in terms of poetry, in terms of visual works, paintings, sculptures, photography works. And so it becomes kind of a place where we are also kind of building our readership, viewership through that. And I think what happens is also in this process translation, as I said in earlier, it also becomes a tool, uh, because we are not then limiting ourselves to English and Marathi, but also kind of tapping into other languages. So we have been kind of publishing translations of scripts of different plays from different languages, Hindi, English. We've been publishing short stories, translations of short stories from Tamil, from Gujarati, Bengali, Hindi. So I think that that conversation kind of takes an interesting kind of
Sorry, and these
direction.
translations from Tamil, Gujarati are into Marathi.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Some are into English, some are also into Marathi. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think in a way that kind of becomes a interesting space for these kinds of conversation. And I think also while doing that, it is also, I mean, interesting to think about. I mean, since we are thinking about translation, is also, like how language plays, and because there is also politics in language and in translation. So like recently what we were doing, we published a conversation between Audre Lorde and James Baldwin about the issue of gender in black movement. And it's a very polemical kind of piece where they're arguing with each other. And we translated that into Marathi and published it. But what you see is that when we were translating it, we were struck with the fact that how to translate the term black. Because in formal academic writing in Marathi, you would translate it as Krishnavarniya, which is a more accepted term. And our translator, Anush Deshpande, kind of challenges us every time whenever we ask him to translate something. And he said that he was very uncomfortable with that term because of its very Sanskritized heavy tone. And he so and we were kind of discussing about it, and what we realized that black as a term was also had mobilized certain meaning because of the Black Lives Movement at that point of time. So whether to use the term black, I mean, keep it as it is, or call it Krishnavarniya, or to go for a more kind of a colloquial way of saying it, or use like a simple term like Kala, Kaya Baika, Kale Purush, but which also has a derogatory connotation uh, uh, attached to color black in our cultural sphere. So then, how do you kind of negotiate with that? And when we went back and forth, and we, kind of decided, we also kind of referred to Sharmila Rege, who's a sociologist, feminist scholar, and who was also a bilingual writer, a magnificent writer. And she kind of, when she's writing about black feminism, she uses this term Kaya Vaikansa Strivad. So and the ways in which she kind of articulates it also resonated with what Audre Lorde kind of formulates in her conversation. Um, and kind of takes away the derogatory meaning away from the term kaya. So that is how we decided to use that term for this particular translation. But what I'm trying to say is that through these conversations with translators, with people who are writing, is also to kind of a way to build a kind of a community of writers, readers, and these kind of dialogic processes, as I said in the beginning, can kind of shape that readership or that audience.
Right. Right. Kamal?
Yeah. No, I think institutional support is really important because I feel that whatever we are doing in Hindi these days, something constructive through, for example, Pratiman, we are doing it due to some kind of institutional help. And because that space is there, and Abhay Kumar Dubey started this work, and we are also helping or participating in that process. So it's a really great experience. And I think Pratiman has been successful to create some kind of readership in small towns of Hindi belt. For example, you can find the readers of Pratiman in Gorakhpur, Ranchi, and many other places. And they are now also, participating in some kind of dialogue with the writings. And since Pratiman is uh, not just publishing hardcore research-based articles, but also some certain things which are related to, some kind of old texts. Like Radha Vallabh Tripathi has written many good articles about Arthashastra, Kam Sutra, and many other texts. And also many different kind of things are there. What I'm trying to say is very simple. In simple words, this is my point. So the thing is that now people are reading it in different parts of Hindi belt at least, and they are also trying to contribute it. contribute in this journal. And students have also found a platform to publish their research papers, which were earlier this kind of space was absent. And since there is very strict peer review process in Pratima, generally most of the students feel that it is a challenge to publish in Pratiman. And the other thing is that many students who are doing their most of the works in English, they are also trying to publish in Pratiman. So there is some kind of space in Pratiman, but one thing is lacking, and I think that is that those who are doing their work in English, they are trying to publish in Pratiman, but generally it is a one-way process, and there is still lots of things to be done to create a dialogical environment between the works in Indian language or Hindi, and for example the dominant sphere, that is English. There is no one-way traffic. There is no clear dialogue, and though there are many persons who are contributing in Pratiman and they are bilingual or multilingual, for example, Aditya Nigam, he can write in Bangla, he can write in Hindi, he can write in, of course, in English. So, what I'm trying to say here is that the dialogue is absent, but
Yes.
recognition is there. People now
Hmm.
recognizing Pratiman as a space. And sometimes, for example, one journalist, Urmilesh, once messaged me that, okay, I read that article on Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram, and that was very good article. So this kind, and I read in Hindi first time that kind of article. So these kind of comments are also there. So what I'm trying to say here is that Pratiman has created some space, and it has
Yeah.
created that space due to institutional help. So
Yeah.
some kind of institutional initiative is necessary, because
Yeah.
without it, it is not possible to create some alternative method of study, some alternative method of research, some alternative method of publishing. Because there is
Right.
one dominant thing, and people are all most of the people are doing their works in that medium. So I think there is a need to create more such options for students, and also for other persons who are living in society and who want to read more on new kind of subjects and new kind of writings.
Yeah, and I think what is really, really important here is that you are saying that Pratiman now is playing a role where it is intervening in the knowledge sort of ecology, right? Where now probably people who are writing in Pratiman are getting referred to by narrators in Hindi. Maybe there is, somebody publishes something, then there is a response to that article in Pratiman, and that's how so I think that that really is a very sort of beginning of a robust sort of creation of knowledge in Hindi then, I think. And I'm going to ask one last question. There is already, I have many, many questions, but I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll throw the floor open to audience questions. But this between, I mean, till now we've been talking fairly straightforward in terms of write in Hindi and write in English or Marathi and English for in terms of your specific context. But again, the thing of producing knowledge in a language other than English, and what does it take? So, for instance, when both of you are writing in Hindi and Marathi respectively, what are and Nupur briefly touched upon that, the untranslatability of certain things, right? From English into, let's say, Marathi, or from English into Hindi. And how does then the fact that you are writing into languages, and I'm assuming that it is not always that you're simply writing in one language and translating that into the other. These are two different writings that you do. But because of, always there are concepts and life worlds that each language has, and sometimes you can't translate one into the other. To what extent have you found in your writing experience that then it forces you to think of birth a new vocabulary, so to say? And I'm not saying that, it's an entire language that you will. But again, think of concepts which might then not be simple translations, but really which are located at that. This can't be translated straightforward in this language, or I can't think of it in this language, and then you come um, with a new, so to say, a terminology, really. I think, and people like, like writers who write in two languages or more than two languages are ideally placed to birth these new vocabularies. But just your thoughts on that. I
Noopur?
mean, let me give a quick a quick reference also here. Kamal, I was reading through your book, the Jungle Ki Hakdari, and I was reading through the. I didn't read the entire thing, but I have read through the broadly the introduction and some of the middle chapters. But it's interesting that in your introduction, the theoretical framework, when you're talking about in Adivasi and indigenous communities in Chhattisgarh and their struggle, to get the forest law passed and their encounters with modernity. You are also proposing a new category in Hindi, which you call the Hashia Samaj, marginal society, and you that is based upon drawing from Partha Chatterjee's very well known and very hotly contested sort of the civil society, political society formulation, but you are definitely deriving from it. But there is also many differences in that, right? So this particular category of Hashia Samaj that you are proposing, again, is that something that you see is a new vocabulary in a way, or a new concept that you're introducing, or do you think it is still largely fairly drawing heavily upon a certain liberal political theory, which has its roots in, broadly the Euro-American epistemological system?
So when I mentioned this thing that some questions are really difficult, so this question is also really difficult. So once Professor Manin Thakur told me that actually you wrote a book or dissertation in Hindi, which is in its style, it's an English book. So, as a writer or as a researcher or as a student, I never realized this thing that how if I'm reading all these things, if I'm writing or following these styles, how can I write totally separate kind of thing, totally distinct thing, which is not related to you know. These vocabularies which are there in different kind of writings. So so my point is that I when I was reading, when I was doing research about my PhD work, I realized that actually the idea of political society and civil society, or differentiation between political society and civil society, is important. But there are different aspects in the politics of tribal people, and I should describe it in different manner. Then, when I use this Hashia Samaj word, I actually tried to argue that this is not related to quote unquote mainstream society. So I want to describe it, or I want to describe about a group which is at the margin. So I should use this term marginal society. So honestly, it is not totally a word which actually came because I was writing in Hindi. अगर मैं इंग्लिश में लिखता तो शायद मैं सीधे मार्जिनल सोसाइटी ही लिखता। तो अभी मुझे लगता है कि आई विल से मैं ये बोलूंगा कि शायद इस पे और सोचने की जरूरत है कि अगर हम हिंदी में लिखते हैं तो ऐसा अलग से क्या आता है, शायद वो उस तरीके से अलग नहीं होता है, पर एक लंबे समय के बाद अगर हम उसको देखेंगे तो हम कहेंगे कि हाँ शायद कुछ अलग था। जैसे मैं प्रतिमान का तो अभी आई मीन वी आर पब्लिशिंग प्रतिमान फ्रॉम 2013, CSDC is publishing it and I'm also part of that team. So now I can actually underline that, okay, what kind of distinctive features are there in Pratiman. Okay, so for example, I can say that Pratiman is talking about Indian knowledge system, okay, but
Mm.
it is talking about Indian knowledge system. It is different from right wing kind of thinking, and it
Mm.
is
Yes.
talking about that kind of knowledge system in a different manner. Then I can also underline this thing that actually there are certain writings which are there in Hindi literature, okay, old writings, and then Pratiman is creating some kind of debate on those issues. Okay, so it is creating some kind of platform where the different kind of writings in Hindi can be discussed. Okay, and we also published translation from different Indian languages, as Nupur mentioned about her journal. So for example, we published something from a Kannada writer. I'm just forgetting his name. His a part of his autobiography. So all these distinctive things are coming up. But right now, I think honestly, I'm not able to say that what is distinctive if you are writing research-based writing. If you're doing research-based writing in Hindi, I think perhaps after 10-15 years we will be able to recognize that actually that kind of thing, a particular kind of thing is distinct in from English in the writing of
Yeah.
Hindi or in other Indian languages. So I mean, if I got your question rightly, this is my
Yeah,
response.
yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I, I don't think, I mean, you can't be carrying the burden of inventing new vocabularies, but really it will be, as you said, maybe a certain critical mass, right? A certain depth of engagement. Let's say in your case, social science research writing that's happened in Hindi, maybe 15 years later there will be an attempt to then sort of seek out vocabulary which is drawn not only from, let's say, simply, oh, the Western theoretical world, but which is more, I guess, rooted in. And I think this is the beginning of that journey. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, Nupur?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm writing in Marathi, I mean, when I started writing in Marathi, the process for me was for initial period, kind of translating my thoughts in
Mm.
from English into Marathi, because my knowledge of art writing and art history came from English books and materials. And eventually, kind of, I started developing my. I feel that I have now kind of started developing my own language and vocabularies through kind of a practice of writing. Uh, but what you also see, the kind of vocabularies and then coining of new terms that you've been talking about. I think I'm again going to go back to history of art writing, and history of art writing also has a kind of, I mean, these debates around how, what do you call modern art, or what is cubism in Marathi, what is Dadaism in Marathi. So all these conversations have happened not only in Marathi but also different other Indian languages. In the early 20th century, mid 20th century. So you see and many times what happens is people, I mean, some terms are set now, but for some words, concepts, there are like parallel terms and there is no standardization. And it's also kind of sometimes ongoing process. So I'm just going to give you one example. For example, a very interesting example is installation art. You know. So in contemporary art discourse, when the term installation became a buzzword across the world, proposing large-scale mixed media constructions or assemblages produced specifically for a particular site or a particular time period. So now, how do you convey that into Marathi? And it's not only just translating it into another language, but also how do you kind of bring the underpinnings that that concept has into that other language. So initially the term was used as adhisthana shilpa in Marathi, and it comes from a very official bureaucratic usage of the term installation, as establishment or placing something or consecration. And more than that, the term also connotes more kind of a sanskritized form of language. But this term was not popularized or did not remain in circulation for a very long period. Instead, today, installation is known as Mandani Shilpa, which
Mm.
is more kind of a colloquial, popular, acceptable, and accessible term. And Mandani in Shilpa's culture, Mandani in Marathi has varied meanings again. It simply means arrangement, which could be used for a kitchen shelf, where utensils are arranged. Or it could be the way vendors arrange their vegetables, groceries, etc. Or it could even mean a conceptual formulation around a particular theoretical term or proposition. So now Mandani Shilpa is a well accepted term in Marathi and is used across different forms of writing, whether it's newspapers, periodical, academic writing. So I think it's also in the installation art. The term comes from the idea of dismantling the aura of an artwork, and Mandani Shilpa kind of conveys that, where it is bringing uh, along, all these different varied meanings. So I think this is the process that kind of happens in one language. The other important process is also when you kind of turn your pool of vocabulary, from your context. So I'll just give you one example. Sudhir Patwardhan had his retrospective exhibition last year, which was curated by Nancy Adajania, a very well-known cultural theorist and curator, and translated her text from English into Marathi. And while I was translating, Nancy used this term "access mundi" while describing and analyzing Sudhir's work,
Sorry,
which is Axis Mundi.
okay, Access Mundi.
Yeah, Axis Mundi. So which is very kind of a common English term. I mean, though it comes from Latin, it is very commonly used in English. When I was translating into Marathi, so there were two ways. One is either you create a coin a new term, because there is no parallel term in Marathi. But the question was also whether you want to get into that neologism and keep producing new terms, which is equally important. I'm not kind of demeritating it. But the other way is also, which I preferred in that context, is that to look for a term which is already present in other linguistic cultural sphere. And I went for Meru Danda, or Mount Meru, which
Hmm.
also comes from Buddhist and Hindu philosophy. Has similar connotation, but comes from a linguistically, culturally, historically, and different time period altogether. So it kind of spoke well, really well within that translation. So kind of untranslatability of certain terms can also produce these interesting interconnections and exchanges. I feel and these are
Yes.
parallel terms and not trying to convey a particular term in English or to a Marathi
Yeah.
audience. But I think these are the strategies that one could use
Yeah.
while kind of translating or writing. Yeah.
Yeah, really, which speak to the sensibilities of then the life word of that particular language, right? Okay, I have several questions. I have already hogged a lot of time, so I am going to stop and and throw the floor open to audience questions. If you have questions, please do. Is there a provision to raise hand on Zoom? Can one do that? Okay, so please raise your hand and then you can unmute your mic and you can speak. Please do. I mean, not my place to say after all this. Please do limit your questions to a short question, like not more than a minute. So yeah, let me see. There's Saeed already has his hand up. Yes, Saeed, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, yeah, it's a very rich discussion on between different languages and bilingualism. I had one question about hierarchy of languages as it was discussed, and my question is that while we discuss a lot here the hierarchy between different between English and Hindi, let's say, or English and Marathi. But my question is also opposite. How do English and Marathi look at social sciences? Are they receptive enough? And my question is also coming from an attempt to translate global works of philosophy into Urdu with a group uh, that I have been working on. And uh, while we see that how English views at the works in Hindi or in other regional languages, there is also kind of a lack of reception. So how would you, and I mean, and when you are writing in a language, you can only work with the already existing discourses. So I would like to know how both of you will respond to this.
Thanks, Saeed. Should we take a couple of questions and then Noopur and Kamal, you can respond to these questions together? Would you prefer that? Okay. So Anuj has raised his hand. Anuj, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, thanks so much, Noopur and Kamal, for sharing your wonderful experiences. My question is more to do with another paradigm through which we think about this interaction between languages. So I feel that right now, in a lot of ways in which we're thinking about multilingualism, we're monolingual in our orientation, in the sense that we're thinking of these languages as separate, that we need to
Uh,
have.
Anuj, your voice is breaking. It's not very clear.
Is it
Maybe
better now?
it's clear. It's coming in bits.
Sorry, is it better now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so what I was saying was that in how we are conceptualizing multilingualism, we are still very monolingual in our orientation, in the sense that we are thinking of these languages as separate and distinct. So a separate Marathi journal, a separate Hindi journal, a separate English journal. But if we look at how actually languages exist in our minds, they all exist together as a hodgepodge. And many scholars are actually now saying that instead of multilingual paradigm, we should think of translingual paradigm, where we publish and think about knowledge production in a mixture of languages like English together, and that would actually increase the accessibility. So just wanted to put it out there. Any thoughts about academic production in these kind of new modes, especially with the internet and all these new forms that are emerging? Like, can you write an academic paper in SMS lingo, for example, in a mixture of Hindi and English to increase accessibility and ability to express? Thank you.
Do we have any other? Let me just see who else has. Do we have any other? Shachi. Yeah, Shachi.
Sachi.
Can you? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Madhura. Thanks, Noopur. Thanks, Bhumika, Anuj, everyone who's been around. I just had a small question, which actually this talk comes in at a very timely time, because I was recently, talking to a friend who's teaching at a regional university, and we were discussing some of the issues that he's been facing. And there is a lot. There's this sort of lack of translation of some basic philosophical texts that you require in order to engage with the larger academia. And at some point, I think that becomes a limitation that I find that is a little difficult to cross in that lacuna of those texts available in regional languages. And at the same time, how does the so we were discussing about something about identity politics, and we could not come up with a term for identity in Hindi, right? The closest thing we could come up with was pehchan, and which is an Urdu term, which is not a Hindi term, right? And then how does the kind of uh, the origins, or let's say the how a particular civilization, how a particular sort of way of thinking is functioning, does that affect then how we can engage through the mode of a language with a larger philosophical framework, like ideas of privacy, let's say, or ideas of identity? Then how do we engage with them in conceptions of language where these are not ever directly imagined per se?
Okay. Great. So, do Noopur and Kamal, would you want to respond to these questions?
Yeah, so I think about the receptivity in regional languages, about philosophical academic writing or translations of, I mean, I think translation has been a very important tool in kind of accessing these different texts. And for me, particularly, I have, like, for the large part of my adult life, I read mostly texts in Marathi and through translations. So from individual kind of experience, I would say, I mean, not mainly academic writings, but writings about philosophy or about mostly literature, which would come through these translations. So I think there is an audience, but I get your points, like, because what happens is every time we are also kind of doing any translations, we have this question in mind: who are we doing this for? If the person is going to read the original English text, or should we take the effort to kind of translate that into another language? So receptivity is, I think, an important aspect of language, but I think also translation and how you kind of circulate these text translations in what format is also very crucial. And maybe there could be different ways of, with the online, with the social media, there could be different ways in which one could also disseminate and circulate these texts, which could then kind of form a kind of or kind of will invite people to engage with these kinds of works. Um, yeah, I'm sorry. Shachi, could you repeat your question? Sorry, I missed the last bit of it. Um,
Yeah, so I think the framing might not have been very clear because my question was on two levels, that whether there is a text, whether you feel there is a lacuna of like texts available from like popular philosophical or canonical texts that are they available in regional languages, and how much of a hurdle does that function as? And secondly, that how do certain kinds of imaginations, right, like an Islamic imagination or a Hindu imagination or a Marathi imagination of conceptions of the self, political conceptions, how do they then translate into how we are able to have philosophical or academic engagements with, let's say, a European sort of language system?
yeah. So I think the question is also connected with the first question, so question in terms of availability of material. So I mean, it's kind of works both ways. There is no availability, there is no receptivity. So I think important aspect is to kind of having these or making these translations available is what I personally also feel. And also thinking about these identities, and you also gave an example of pehchan, the term pehchan for identity, and it not being Hindi but being Urdu. So I was also wondering about uh, uh, like, would it not be possible to use that term still in Hindi, because the way you kind of speak Hindi is not kind of a, like, the pure Sanskritized Hindi that we're kind of talking about. So why can't these terms kind of, which are more popular, which are kind of are part of people's kind of vocabulary, everyday vocabulary, become part of these terminologies as well, rather than kind of looking for new terminologies, or referring to some uh, also kind of a very watertight kind of compartmentalization of these, but rather kind of looking at it more kind of fluid ways in which language could also function. And
Kamal, would you like
Yeah,
to respond?
I could not note down the question of Saeed, so please, if he repeat it just in short, then it'll be easier for me. Saeed.
Yes. So I was saying that question was about, Shachi has raised that is there a lacuna of translations in regional languages? And my question is that related to that is there a demand for the same? And is it just for the students that these translations are meant for, or is there a wider reception of social scientific discourses? Is Hindi and Urdu and Marathi and other language discourses, are they trying to understand, is those, it's not just about jargons, but are there concerns related to the social scientific discipline? So that is my question, is therefore is about we speak of hierarchy of English and Hindi and English and other languages, but in terms of social sciences, but are regional languages receptive enough for social sciences?
So I think I will start with Said's question. I mean, we can see it at many layers, but I mean, if you think about, for example, some kind of concepts like governmentality, okay, so students must know it, so they are, they want to some kind of study material on that this. But there are many other ideas, concepts, discourses about which we can find that there are writings in Hindi, and I'm talking particularly about Hindi here, and I hope that this is true about other Indian languages too. So, for example, if you think about writings related to feminism, okay, you'll find that there are lots of theoretical writings, theoretical discourses are there in Hindi too, and many people are writing originally about these things, and they are using many terms. I mean, now Pitrashatta is an very much known term for patriarchy, and there are many other terms. So I think it depends on the issues related to society, and some concepts which are coming from West are very much acceptable in our society because people are raising questions related to that. And some other concepts are not that much, discussed in, common readers, among common readers. And we can find that actually students need certain books to understand it. So I just want to mention this thing that I translated some textbooks for political science students. So, for example, I translated William Lika's Contemporary Political Philosophy, and I mean it's a very good book to give an introduction of all kind of discourses which are there in contemporary political philosophy in Western society. But many students feel that actually certain things are difficult in this book. And I think this difficulty is not just coming from language. Maybe language can be one issue, but it is also coming from, certain, because if you are teaching these topics to students in English, you'll feel that, okay, all students are not getting these things in just one lecture. They will raise questions. So with book, you also need teachers. So this is the point, that if we are thinking that just translation of the book is the sufficient thing, I don't think it is a sufficient thing for any kind of study process. The second thing is related to this English kind of thing. So Francesca Orsini, I think, did some project work on this issue, that whether English should be accepted in India or not. And in Pratiman, we published many papers on this topic in one issue. The basic thing is that though in writing we are still not accepting English, but if we have to write about governmentality, we can write, and generally we write prashashakiyata for first time, and then we use, at least I use governmentality. When I teach students or when I discuss this thing with students, even in Hindi, then of course I never use prashashakiyata. I always use governmentality. When I teach students about John Rawls, okay, I always use the term original position rather than we have one term, mool sthiti. But I mean, I once, if I'm teaching them in Hindi, I'll say that okay, Rawls is talking about Rawls एक मूल स्थिति के बारे में बात करते हैं, एक ओरिजिनल पोजीशन के बारे में बात करते हैं, और फिर वो क्या है, विल ऑफ इग्नोरेंस क्या है, तो फिर हम वो इंग्लिश ही असल में बात कर रहे होते हैं अगर उसको हम देखें तो। और उसमें मुझे लगता है कि हिंदी में अब काफी हद तक इस चीज को एक्सेप्ट किया जाने लगा है कि ठीक है, आप उसको अगर जहां जरूरत है वहां आप अगर किसी दूसरी भाषा से शब्द लेते हैं, उर्दू से तो बिल्कुल ही कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, क्योंकि उर्दू और हिंदी क्या है वो एक अलग तरह का प्रोजेक्ट है कुछ लोगों का कि वो डिफरेंस करना चाहते हैं। जैसे कि एक बार हम क्वेश्चन पेपर ट्रांसलेट करने के लिए हम डिपार्टमेंट गए थे, तो हमने चर्चा लिखा, तो चर्चा की जगह उन्होंने कहा कि आप विवेचना लिखिए क्योंकि चर्चा उर्दू वर्ड हो जाता है। तो लेकिन आमतौर पे हिंदी में अब इस तरीके का डिस्कशन नहीं है, और जहां डिस्कशन है वो एक खास तरीके के पोजीशन से वो लोग बोल रहे होते हैं क्योंकि उनको लगता है कि हिंदी और उर्दू को अलग करना है। लेकिन इंग्लिश को अभी उस तरीके से एक्सेप्ट नहीं किया गया है, और ये उम्मीद की जाती है कि जब आप लिख रहे हैं बातचीत में भले ही वो कुछ चीजें चल जाती हैं, और कुछ लोग जो कि ज्यादा सीरियस राइटिंग कर रहे हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल अभय कुमार दुबे, वो इसको पसंद करेंगे कि आप हिंदी में ही प्रशासकीयता ही बोलें, लेकिन आमतौर पे स्टूडेंट्स और हम सभी इंग्लिश ही बोलते हैं, लेकिन लिखने में अभी वो चीज एक्सेप्टेड नहीं है। और दूसरी चीज ये है कि जो टेक्स्ट की बात एक आई थी, वो ये कि बहुत सारे टेक्स्ट, इतने ज्यादा टेक्स्ट है कि आप सबको एक दूसरे लैंग्वेज में लाने का एक इंस्टीट्यूशनल मैकेनिज्म बनाना होगा, एंड दैट इंस्टीट्यूशनल मैकेनिज्म इज नॉट इन आवर कंट्री. So one individual can translate 1 or 2 books. So and then there are lots of problems, copyright and other things. So for example, and I'm not doing some kind of promotion of my work, but I just want to mention that I translated Tom Bottomer's Dictionary of Marxist Thought, uh, but it is not published yet. Why? Because there is a, this issue of copyright. I translated John Rawls' Theory of Justice. It is still under publication. I translated it in 2014, both the works, but these things are not published. So the point is that there are lots of problems, and I, as a student or as a teacher, now feel that translation is just one alternative. We should also try to write originally in our own language, and if we are not able to write, at least if students are there, if they want to discuss it in their language, we should discuss it, and we should contribute in the discussion of different kind of concepts which are there in different societies, different societal backgrounds, and we should try to use certain examples to give understanding about those concepts. So my point is that demand is there, of course, but I mean, without any institutional support, we cannot create a situation where we translate even most important works in any Indian languages. So you can find that actually few translations are there, and then again the issue is that whether your translation is good or not. Okay, so there are lots of complex issues, and as I mentioned that for example identity, अस्मिता is there, पहचान is there. मैं तो जब लिखता हूँ तो पहचान यूज करता हूँ, पर मुझे अस्मिता से भी कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, और मुझे लगता है कि शायद हिंदी में अधिकांश लोग अस्मिता भी समझ लेते हैं कि जब हम अस्मिता की बात कर रहे हैं तो किस चीज की बात कर रहे हैं। और बहुत तरह की, बहुत अलग अलग तरीके से हिंदी लिखी जाती है, शायद इंग्लिश भी बहुत अलग अलग तरीके से लिखी जाती है। तो मेरा रिस्पॉन्स यही रहेगा कि लैंग्वेज में जो कुछ कॉन्सेप्ट्स होते हैं जहां पर दिक्कत होती है, पर मैंने तो उसका रास्ता यही निकाला है कि एक शब्द अगर हमें मिल जाता है तब भी इसमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, कि बहुत सारे जो कॉन्सेप्ट्स हैं, कुछ लोग बोलेंगे कि तो हारने की तरह है कि आपने मान लिया कि आप उसको ला ही नहीं सकते अपने लैंग्वेज में, पर अगर हमें उसे एक्सप्लेन करना है तो उसको उसी रूप में रखने में कोई बुराई नहीं है। और मुझे लगता है कि शायद ये इंग्लिश में भी ट्रेडिशन रहा है, हीगेल के बहुत सारे जो टर्म्स हैं लोग उसी तरीके से लिख कर उसको आगे बढ़ाते हैं, और भी दूसरे राइटर्स के। तो ये कुछ रिस्पॉन्स है, आंसर तो नहीं है, बस ऐसे ही।
Yeah, I think fluidity really seems to be also, since we are dealing with this really, I think, fraught area of translation, which is the original pure. And I think that for all of us, and there has been a parallel conversation in the chat box also going on, which kind of comments upon this, that there needs to be a certain porosity and fluidity, right? Which also, Kamal, you are pointing to. We have far overshot our time, and everybody's though stayed back. But I think it's time to sort of end this conversation. As I said, there are several more, you know, themes that I would have loved to discuss, but maybe we can. And again, as I'm sure everybody says now in online, there is no chai and samosa to discuss this over after this is over. So I guess we just have to wait for whenever the pandemic is over to maybe have a second part to this with chai and samosa also. So I would really like to thank Kamal and Noopur for agreeing to have this conversation, for agreeing to reflect upon your writing process really, and sort of share it with us. It's also a very intimate process. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you all of you for attending this, and also a big thank you to the JGU IT team for organizing the Zoom, staying through this, recording this, and making sure that there are no technical glitches. So I thank you all once again on behalf of the CWS, and hopefully we'll have a sequel to this. There are many, many questions which I still have, and I'm sure the audience has. So I'm hoping to see you all sometime soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhura.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Madhura. That was terrific. Huh? This is
Durba. Hi.
I actually
Thank you.
after my full day of teaching for this, and it was really
Oh my God. Oh,
it?
I'm so happy. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making it.
It was really, I mean, just great actually, and
Lovely.
hope to do much more of this, or attend much more of this. So, yeah.
Yes, I will definitely keep you posted. But thank you so much for attending. And of course, I mean, at some point, it'll be nice to get a detailed feedback as well.
Yeah, no, but I mean, so many things just to think about. I think it raised so
Yeah,
many things.
absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Just a delight.